Good morning. In the last couple of weeks, we looked at Messianic references in the Psalms, and there were dozens more that we didn't have time for, so we looked at the highlights. And now we get to the prophets, which is the other major area of the Old Testament that has Messianic prophecies, of course. And today, we will just do our first part. We'll start chronologically in the 8th century BC, where we had a number of prophets. The prophets became very active in the 8th century because they were warning the northern kingdom of Israel, the northern 10 tribes, about their impending punishment by the Lord, namely the Assyrian captivity. The Assyrian conquest of the north began in 722 BC and concluded in 721 BC. And in advance of that, the prophets began to preach in volume. Now, Hosea and Amos and Micah are the 8th century prophets that we will look at today. And of course, late in the 8th century, at the time, overlapping the time of the captivity and warning the southern kingdom of Judah, the same is going to happen to you, was Isaiah. And Isaiah is a treasure trove of Messianic prophecy there. So we'll start out with Hosea chapter 3, where the theme is that the Messiah is referred to as the second David. And we see this throughout the prophets, that the word David gets used long after David's dead. So it's an obvious, you can't refer to David in the future when he's already dead unless you're talking about someone else besides the literal David. And the Jews always recognize these are the Messianic prophecies. We read in these two verses, "For the children of Israel shall dwell many days without king or prince, without sacrifice or pillar, without ephod or household gods." Notice it even references household gods. They're not supposed to have those, right? That's their idolatry. He's saying they're not going to have any religion, any faith at all. The people of Israel are going to be spiritually destitute. They're not even going to have idolatry, much less the true God. Everything is going to be taken from them. And by the way, who does Israel refer to here? It's just the 10 northern tribes, right? Because at the time of the divided kingdom, when the word Israel is used in certain context, it's limited to the 10 northern tribes. The southern kingdom was Judah. Now, sometimes the word Israel, which Jacob was renamed to be Israel, sometimes the word Israel or even the word Jacob is used to refer to all of God's people. But at this period of time, when the prophets talk to Israel, they're talking to the northern tribes. So this is about the northern tribes and their punishment. But then it says, "Afterward the children of Israel shall return and seek the Lord their God and David their king. And they shall come in fear to the Lord and to his goodness in the latter days." Well, of course, David's been dead for a while. So, it's futuristic language, and yet it's about David, who's been dead for a couple hundred years now. So this is Messianic prophecy. This is the Messiah as the David who will come in the future when the people begin to return to him. And of course, they won't all return. One of the themes of the prophets is that only a faithful remnant will come back. But the door is always open for those in Israel and later in Judah to come back to the Lord, to come back to the Messiah also. And notice how it's phrased. They're going to come back to They shall return and seek the Lord their God and David their king. The king is not just an administrator, This future king, you need to not only seek the Lord, you need to seek him. You must seek the Messiah, the Jews are being told here. It's not just that you have to return to the Lord, and by the way, you'll also have a king at that time. You have to seek this second David. Now, another theme of restoring the house of David is found in Amos. Amos has a prophecy. Amos has 9 chapters. The last chapter starts out with the 5th vision that Amos gets, and it's a lengthy, it's 10 verses of doom and gloom. This is the doom that's being pronounced on the northern tribes of Israel, verses 1 through 10. But then we have a change. The last verses, 11 through 15 of Amos, is hopeful. After all that doom and gloom and judgment being pronounced, the last 5 verses here, 11 through 15, are all about the Messianic restoration. So we'll read that. Amos 9, beginning in verse 11. In that day I will restore the fallen booth of David. I will repair its gaps, restore its ruins, and rebuild it, as in the days of old, so that they may possess the remnant of Edom and all the nations that are called by my name. This is the Lord's declaration. He will do this. Hear this, the days are coming, the Lord's declaration, when the plowman will overtake the reaper and the one who treads grapes, the sower of seed. It's an agricultural picture of abundance to where you can barely plant the seed fast enough to where the harvester comes along behind and reaps a big crop. The mountains will drip with sweet wine and all the hills will flow with it. I will restore the fortunes of my people Israel. They will rebuild and occupy ruined cities, plant vineyards and drink their wine, make gardens and eat their produce. I will plant them on their land, and they will never again be uprooted from the land I have given them. The Lord your God has spoken. So it begins with an interesting phrase. In that day I will restore the fallen booth of David. A booth or tabernacle or tent reminds them of when they were in the wilderness and all you could live in was a little tent. And when Tim preached recently on some of the old stories, the old festivals and feasts, one of them was the feast or festival of booths or tabernacles. And in that time, and even to this day when Jews celebrate it, they'll build a little tent. Some Jews will build a little tent in their backyard and go live in it for that week. It's a reminder of when they didn't have anything, when they were in the wilderness. And the term house of David, house means dynasty usually. The house of David is the Davidic dynasty that God has declared, but it's not referred to as a house, it's referred to as a little tent here. And it's referred to as fallen. Everything has fallen into ruin. Everything has gone south, because of their sin. But this says God's saying, I will restore the booth of David. It also ends by saying there won't be ever another captivity after the Messiah returns. There were only 2 captivities of the Jewish people, the Assyrian captivity and the Babylonian captivity, in about 721 BC and 586 BC. But, of course, only a remnant want to return. It's not all Israelites who want to return. There's a verse in here, the second verse, verse 12, says, so that they may possess the remnant of Edom and all the nations that are called by my name. Now, once again, we've seen, going back to Genesis, that when the Messiah is prophesied, it's not just for the Jewish people. It's not just their Messiah. Just like Abraham was promised, through you all the nations of the earth will be blessed. And whenever you see the word nations, it means those other nations. There are all kinds of passages in the Old Testament. Why do the nations rage against the Lord? It's referring to those Gentiles, all the nations outside the chosen people. And quite often in these Messianic prophecies, you see languages outside of Israel, because the blessings of the Messiah are going to be universal. They're for everybody. And once again, that doesn't mean that the Jews really focused on that. We've talked about this before. By the time of Jesus, Jews weren't sitting around hoping that all these Gentile nations would be blessed by the Messiah. They wanted the Messiah to rescue them and their land from the Gentiles. They didn't care about the Messiah blessing Romans and Egyptians and whomever. That was not on their mind. But it's all through the Messianic language of the Old Testament. The nations who, or at least the remnants, the minority within the nations who seek the Lord, who call on the name of the Lord, are going to be blessed through the Messiah. And that's, of course, fulfilled when a new covenant comes that's for all the nations. And so it says that this restored house of David, which has fallen into disrepair, it's a mere tent, but this restored house of David will possess Edom, and that word possess is reminiscent of the same root word that was used in one of the early Messianic prophecies we read, which was Balaam's oracle, in which he said of the Messiah, that after the Messiah comes, Edom shall become a possession. So the Messiah is always forecast to have something that goes beyond the boundaries of the promised land, beyond the boundaries of just helping the nation of Israel. That the kingdom of God is going to expand. But it's only those who call on the name of the Lord. Not all Gentiles are going to be blessed. Not every individual Gentile is going to be blessed by the Messiah. It's only those who seek him and call on the name of the Lord who are blessed. Now, we move on to Micah. Micah is a prophet to the southern kingdom of Judah. However, he's late 8th century. He witnesses the Assyrian conquest of the north during his lifetime. But then he carries a prophetic message to Judah. Now, there's about 3 sections of Micah. The first two chapters of Micah are the doom and gloom at the beginning. They're a series of judgments by God against his people because of their disobedience and their idolatry. And yet, there's this sudden ray of hope that pops up at the end of chapter 2 of Micah. After nothing but doom and gloom for 2 chapters, there's 2 verses at the end that suddenly turn hopeful and messianic. I will surely assemble all of you, O Jacob. When the word Jacob is used like this, it means the same as Israel, because Jacob's name was changed to Israel. But this means the nation of Israel. But it's once again, it's the 10 northern tribes. I will gather the remnant of Israel. I will set them together like a sheep in a fold, like a flock in its pasture, a noisy multitude of men. The breaker, and this is translated various ways, the breaker is come up before them. They break through and pass the gate, going out by it. Their king passes on before them, the Lord at their head. So there's a picture that those from Israel who return to the Lord are still not really set free. They're like sheep that are in a pen. Someone needs to break them out of that pen. Someone needs to open the gate and lead them forward like a shepherd. And that's the Messiah. Messiah is the one who is the breaker. He breaks the remnant out of the sheepfold. And that last sentence in the Hebrew grammar, this is not two different people, this is one person. Their king, the breaker, the Messiah the king, passes on before them, the Lord at their head. The king and the Lord are the same person. The Messiah and the Lord are the same person. So this is yet another instance in the Old Testament where there's a very strong implication. The Messiah is coming and he's going to be divine, not just another king. He's divine. He's the Lord at your head, leading you. And so here we have a very important reference, not the only one, to the divinity of the Messiah. Now later, in the book of Micah, we have a very famous passage. We've heard it quoted in the New Testament. Micah also has its doom and gloom moments. Like many of the prophets, it has its condemnations of the disobedient people. Micah chapter 3 is a whole chapter of judgments on the people. Like, therefore, because of you, Zion shall be plowed as a field, Jerusalem shall become a heap of ruins. This is before the Babylonian captivity, which made this come true. This is more than a century before the Babylonians conquered Jerusalem. This is a prophecy by God that Judah is going to suffer pretty much the same fate as Israel did because of its disobedience. But then chapter 4 turns hopeful. After all the destruction of chapter 3, chapter 4 of Micah is promising some future renewal. And now chapter 5 is going to tie that renewal to David and Bethlehem. So let's read the first 4 verses of Micah chapter 5. Now, daughter who is under attack, you slash yourself in grief. A siege is set against us. They are striking the judge of Israel on the cheek with a rod. Bethlehem Ephrathah, you are small among the clans of Judah. One will come from you to be ruler over Israel for me. His origin is from antiquity, from eternity. Therefore, he will abandon them until the time when she who is in labor has given birth. Then the rest of his brothers will return to the people of Israel. He will stand and shepherd them in the strength of the Lord, in the majestic name of the Lord his God. They will live securely, for then his greatness will extend to the ends of the earth. So we have, it was known, of course, among all the Jews that Bethlehem, the little town north of Jerusalem, was where David came from. And now we're being told that the new leader in the future will come from Bethlehem. An amazing prophecy. Even though it's small, it's really just a little village. And it says about that ruler, his origin is from antiquity, from eternity. So once again, this is not just another king somehow. This is someone divine. And then also it concludes at the end of verse 4, his greatness will extend to the ends of the earth. So once again, the Messiah isn't just for renewing Jerusalem or Judah or all 12 tribes. It's to the ends of the earth. And so there's a lot here. The amazing futuristic thing to us is that Bethlehem was singled out and said to be the place where the Messiah would come from, and that was fulfilled. But it's also very important in this brief passage to note the divine references. His origin is from eternity. This is somehow an eternal being who's going to be the Messiah. And his blessings, his greatness will extend to the ends of the earth. So the new covenant in multiple places in the Old Testament is prophesied to be for everyone, for the entire earth, not just for the chosen people. So that's all we look at today, and we'll look at Isaiah beginning next week. Thank you very much for your attention. I think that we'll continue to see in Isaiah a lot of amazing prophecies of the future. Thank you.